Hello everyone, I have designed an entire fan-made TFT set called Shimmering Seas, with a bunch of new traits, units, and mechanics. The theme of the set is that of a pirate adventure, where a bunch of different crews are set to explore this mysterious sea and find the treasures within. In this video, I'm going to do a Mort Dog style rundown of this custom set, and in the future I'll go through a lot of the other features and ideas, since it would be very difficult to fit everything into one video. Before I start, something I want to emphasize is that this is not an official Riot project and is completely independent. Riot allows users to use their IP for projects like this, as long as we emphasize that, and in turn are able to use anything from those projects that they want, which is fine by me. I've spent a lot of time cooking up the set, so would really appreciate it if you liked the video. I'd love to hear feedback on it in the comments below. I also want to get this out right before set 15 releases on the PBE, so if you're interested in watching me solve that set on day 1 again, be sure to subscribe to the channel. So to start, I'm going to go over all the units. I quickly want to shout out the Fanmade TFT Set Discord, who created the tools I use to make these unit cards that I'm about to show. I'm not affiliated with them either, but they've done a really great job and are a great help to anyone interested in creating a similar project of their own. The link to their Discord is in the description. So for one costs, our tanks are Aatrox, Garen, Leona, Master Yi, Scion, and Warwick. And our carries are Akshan, Fizz, Karthus, Rise, Sivir, Talon, and Victor. As you can see, there's some pretty interesting choices for tanks, but it's kind of hard to get units that fit the theme that also have a good skin line that corresponds. I kind of have to make do with what exists, since I'm not really able to make custom skins. Aatrox is a tank. His ability is an AoE knockup, like his Q3 from League. Garen is also a tank. He is a little bit more damage oriented, but he's still like meant to be a tank. His ability, he spins around and he gains durability. Leona, this is pretty much a reprint of one cost Leona. She gets damage reduction. I think it's a pretty like safe spell. It does its job. Master Yi is a pretty interesting choice for a tank, but it's very difficult to find things that have the correct skin line that I can use as a tank. So it is what it is, and I gave him a pretty okay spell. Like, he uses his meditates, but he has some visually cool elements as well. Scion, pretty straightforward tank. This is a unit that actually like makes sense as a tank. His spell is his W. Shield scales with max health. This Scion unit also gains max health from killing enemies, so there's a potential scaler there. And we have Warwick, who's kind of an in-between to one cost Olaf and two cost Warwick. This guy is like an aggressive version, I think, of that Olaf. He gains on-hit healing and he gains attack speed depending on how low his enemy is. So it's kind of a snowbally tank, which is not something we really see. As for carries, we have Akshan. When making this, I kind of thought this was a cool spell, but realizing it's kind of functionally similar to current Kog'Maw. Akshan has a passive similar to that of League, where he has like a 3 hits passive that does bonus magic damage. In this set, his spell gives him an extra projectile that counts as an attack, which allows him to proc that passive much more often. This is like a typical AD carry Ginsu's user. Also has some interesting traits. Fizz is a AP assassin. His ability is his Q. He dashes around. Pretty mobile. If you position him well, he can get onto the backline. Low mana cost, blue buff user. Karthus. This is generic AP caster, blue buff user, and something interesting that I did with him is I intentionally altered his pattern so that his mana cost with blue buff, like, it has an interesting like interaction with the spell pattern where if you are familiar with jungle Karthus in League, you know that the basic pattern of auto attacking and using your Q is like Q auto, Q auto auto, and with blue buff, this Karthus has the exact same pattern. So this Karthus is a blue buff user. He's spam casting spells. Obviously, the numbers would be balanced around him spam casting spells, but yeah, his spell is his Q. It's just AoE blast, does more damage if only a single unit is hit. Rise, this guy's pretty interesting. So his spell is basically his EQ, except translating that to TFT, it's like a little weird. So the way this Rise works is that he spreads his flux. The flux is set to a certain like duration. So if he has a lot of mana regen, he can spread it further, but obviously doing so would probably make him do less damage. So he spreads his flux and then he just throws a Q and he hits all flux afflicted targets. Sivir. She is a wild unit. Wild, as I'll explain later, is the set's reroll trait. As you can see, Talon also is a wild. Sivir pretty much just throws her Q. Talon is an assassin. As I said, he's a wild. This Talon uses his W, which is his rake. He throws the blades and they return. Pretty similar to Sivir, except Talon is melee and the paths of these blades kind of converge so that he actually has pretty good single target damage and then he has a little bit of AoE damage. But the unit that's directly in front of him, like his main target, they'll be getting hit by all the blades, so they'll take a lot more damage than all the other units. And lastly, we have Victor, pretty generic AP caster. He throws his Q and then he fires the laser. Good single target damage. He also gives a shield to one of his allies. Overall, this is like one of the healthier versions of those do thing, give shield to ally, and get empowered auto. Next we have the 2 costs. The main tanks are Jace, Riven, Singed, Taric, Xin Zhao, and then kind of Diana. So Jace, he is a straightforward tank. His ability is pretty cool in that he knocks back his primary targets. So there's a lot of positioning things you can do with him, because if you knock a target out of range of your carries, that can mean a lot in terms of the flow of combat. Knockback abilities are really rarely given, but I think this is a pretty good way to make Jace a tank. He also gets, I think, some resists. Riven, she shields herself, and then I think she shoots her slash from her ult. Singe is a very interesting unit. His spell's kind of convoluted. It's basically his ult from League. It's kind of similar to Set 13 Singe in terms of implementation, where like he just drinks the brew and he like gets stats and stuff. But this Singed, it's more true to the original in that this is selfish, but also he gets like a lot of stats. He gets armor, MR, I think AP, and then after the spell wears off, he gets to keep half of the stats permanently. So this is like a scaling unit. He's not like the most tanky in the beginning, but he can become very tanky later on in combat. Next we have Taric. Pretty straightforward tank. This Taric uses his Q auto pattern from League. So he heals himself and adjacent allies, and then he gets the 2 empowered autos. Xin Zhao is pretty similar to current Jarvan set 14, except they basically stole Xin Zhao's spell and they put it onto J4. So Xin Zhao is reclaiming that ability. So he's basically gonna swipe and reduce the armor of adjacent allies, and then instead of getting a shield, he's gonna get durability, which kind of replicates like his ult. Like when he uses his ult and like he does like the sweep, like he gets that barrier that blocks projectiles from like out of range. Diana, she kind of a tank, but like kind of a carry, can be balanced either way. This Diana has her 3-hit passive where she cleaves in an AoE and does bonus magic damage. Her spell gives her a shield and gives her attack speed, so you can play her towards damage, play around that passive, or you can just build her as a tank. She gets good shield value. She has good traits defensively. Callista, this is one of the ones I probably cooked the most with. Callista's spell is really convoluted, but basically it's like 3-cost Callista, except she shares that with an ally. So she appoints one of her allies as her Oathsworn, and then when she casts her abilities, she and her Oathsworn both, like, they build up damage, and if the damage reaches a certain threshold onto one of their targets, they will get executed. As a result, there's a lot of things that you can do with Callista, and pairing her with units that targets like high priority targets. Like if you pair with a unit that has backline access, that could be very strong as you just increase their threshold damage. Lucian, this is a reprint of 2-cost Lucian. He has some pretty interesting traits. So this Lucian dashes and he fires 2 autos, similar to his passive in League. Both of these autos do bonus magic damage, but like the number isn't like that crazy. I'm basically taking the Lucian that existed and just putting the magic damage onto both of his attacks. Like I'm just splitting it evenly. So this is still like primarily an AD unit, but he has a pretty good AP damage share. And I say he's an AD unit because even though he's doing bonus magic damage, he's still firing 2 attacks on every ability. His mana cost is pretty low, and his traits give him a lot of AD, so he should most likely be played in that manner. Misfortune, this is another kind of interesting one. Not sure if this implementation works super well in TFT, but this is my set, so I get to try it. Basically, we're using MF's W and her passive. This MF, she gets attack speed, and she kind of dual wields. So she will target 2 units independently, so like her current target and then another, like the nearest target. And she'll alternate between attacking them, and then she'll do bonus damage as she does so. If there was a way to like animate it so that like she's like shooting each one like independently from like each of her 2 guns, that'd be a pretty cool way to do that. That's like the idea, at least. Next we have Nami, who is pretty much similar to set 7 Astral Nami. That Nami was kind of problematic, just based on how she was designed with her traits, but this one is a bit more reasonable. The spell is similar, but obviously would be rebalanced around like the current set standards of TFT. No ridiculous healing. She doesn't have the mage trait, so she doesn't double cast. She doesn't have astral, so you don't 3-star her for free. But her spell basically uses her W from League. She throws like the water and it bounces between enemies and allies, dealing damage to enemies or healing allies. I think the targeting all around is just the lowest health unit, so she'll heal the lowest health allies or she'll deal damage to the lowest health enemy. Nidalee, this is like another one that's like kind of interesting because like it's not the implementation of Nidalee that people would think, but I think given her traits and like the theme, I think this spell works really well in this case specifically. So Nidalee is the damage over time champion of the set. Her spell is basically her W, like the traps. This Nidalee is like a ranged AP backliner, and she places traps under other units, and she spreads it over time. And like if they already are trapped, like she just goes to the next unit. It has a pretty interesting interaction with one of her origins, which is the Ardent Flame origin, which essentially gives her access to burn on her abilities. So basically you're playing this damage over time unit with a free Morello, so that gives you more options to itemize her differently, like with like blue buff, gunblade, void staff, or like archangels or something like that. Next we have Kiana, who is another ardent flame. She has that burn built into her kit. This Kiana is like a bruiser assassin-y type unit, kind of like in the Fury, sort of. This Kiana has a passive where she heals on dealing damage to a unit that is burning, and of course her trait allows her to do that, so she has access to healing in like a more interesting manner. And then her ability is like pretty straightforward. She dashes, like she does like that smart dash where she tries to like position herself to hit the most unit in a line, and then she just throws her Q from League, so it just does damage to like 2 units in a line, and she'll smart dash to try to get like both units as much as possible. And then lastly we have Talia, my poorly recolored version of this Talia. But this Talia is basically a variation of set 9 Talia, where she does the knock-up, she throws the thing. This is the Talia where you had the full knock-up comp. She has synergy with other knock-ups in the sets, and this set has a lot of knock-ups. Obviously the goal is not to balance Talia around like the knock-up passive, but rather around her main spell. But she has a lot more tools to play with, so there's a lot of ways you can play that comp, and there's a way to fit everything together. She's also a Crystalline, which is the cash out trait, and talk about it before with Leona, but Crystalline is the cash out trait of the set. I have 3 costs. The tanks are Nautilus, Rel, Rumble, Tahm Kench, and then a couple other frontliners are Vi and Nasus. Nautilus, he has the AoE shock blast that pulls enemies in. He's a big CC bot. Rel, she is kind of similar. She uniquely steals the resists of units that she hits with her ability, and she gets pretty tanky that way. Rumble is a low mana cost shielder. He fires the harpoons and he reduces the magic resist of like targets hit. Tahm Kench, this is like a super pure tank. This guy's very tanky. His spell is basically like he has the gray health system from League, so he stores damage he takes, and then when he casts his spell, he gets like a really big shield that scales with like all the gray health that he has. And then after the shield wears off, he heals for some of the remaining bits. So he's like like much of a pure tank as you can get. And then we have Vi, who has a really interesting spell pattern where She's going to try to dash to the furthest unit in range, but she will collide on the first enemy hit. So if you position her where like there's like a gap in the enemy front line, she can dash to enemy backline and she can do a lot of damage. But otherwise, she will just collide onto whoever she hits and she gets her shield. Her spell damage scales with range traveled, so like if she does make that far dash, she can do a lot of damage to the backliner and probably kill them. But if you manage to block her, uh, not much damage, pretty decent tank value. Otherwise, she gives herself a shield. Nasus, another one of the more interesting spells, I think. This Nasus uses his E, but this E has pretty interesting properties. So it does like not that much damage, but it lasts like a long time. It's like AoE, and it innately shreds units inside of it. If you give them the right support, units can die within the circle, and then if units in the circle die, the like radius of his thing, it increases. So his spell gets bigger the more units that die within it, which means if they get a lot of kills really quickly, his spell can be hitting pretty much the whole board. Nasus also heals whenever this happens, so he can be pretty tanky. This is like a very like thresholdy like snowball unit, whereas if he gets going, he can be very overwhelming. But if you shut him down quickly, then obviously he's not that big of a threat. Ashe, pretty straightforward AD carry. Her spell fires her hawk shot, and they explode. She fires two of them, one around her current target and then another around the nearest clump. And this just explodes, does magic damage, and it chills, so it reduces their attack speed. Ashe also has a passive where she does bonus damage to chilled targets, so her ability essentially gives her access to this bonus damage. So she's meant to be an AD carry. You don't use her spell so much for the damage, but rather the utility and the synergy with her passive. In contrast, Kale is a magic damage, like a ranged DPS unit. Also, like against this kind of user, this Kale has like the waves of damage. She has AoE, she like skins and likes AP. Her spell is rather supportive in nature in that she heals and she gets attack speed to herself and an ally. But this has a ramping aspect in that the attack speed that she grants on herself lasts for the rest of combat. So she scales up pretty nicely like that. Next we have Lulu. Lulu has a pretty cool spell idea, which I don't actually know how well it would be implemented. But like the idea I have that she will shield an ally and then she will like use her Q and it'll converge onto her primary target. So she will like shield an ally, like the like lowest HP ally, whatever, and then fire a bolt from herself and from the ally that she shielded, and they're going to converge onto her current target. So it's basically a combination of like a straight line like burst, and then I'll put like another one coming out from the shielded target. So you can potentially hit a lot of units with that, depending on where the shielded unit is. Next we have Pike. This is like a snowball assassin, pretty generic. It similar to Rengar. I think more similar to Elise from set 7. That's like the primary inspiration. This Pike, he does damage, and then if he kills, he kind of dives underwater and he goes and targets the lowest health enemy, and then he like resets. I mean, it's basically identical to that Elise, except this one's AD. His traits are a little different, probably more annoying. But with the way modern TFT is, shouldn't be as problematic. Like, you can make it not terrible to play against. And we have Tristana, another backline 80 damage dealer. This Tristana, she places a bomb on her targets, and then after 3 seconds it explodes. She has a pretty interesting mechanic in that the more times you attack the targets while the bomb is on them, the more damage that the bomb does. So it's like a subtle attack speed scaling where you want her to attack more so that her bomb does more damage when it explodes. At the same time, like if you can't just all in on attack speed because you want the actual thing to scale with like base AD. But it's essentially a backline caster that scales with Ginsu's. And we have Ziggs. Pretty simple spell. He throws his ult. It's just a big explosion. It does more damage to the sensor and it does less damage to enemies further from it, but it's a big explosion. It's like a 2-hex AoE. Also has pretty interesting synergy with his Devastator traits, which I'll explain later. And finally we have Zyra. This is pretty much a modernized version of 2-cost Zyra. the one that stuns the whole row and like would mess up your backline and is really annoying. This is like the reimagined, like rebalanced version of that. One, her mana cost is higher. I think people can appreciate that. Two, she shares the mechanic that like a Loon from set 11 and Quinn from set 9 is, where there's like a damage pool and it's split evenly amongst the units hit. So if she hits like very few units, it's gonna do a lot of damage to them. But if she hits a lot of units, it's not gonna do like as much damage. It's gonna like split it across all of them evenly. She also like similarly, she doesn't just like prioritize in a row. She can also attack like in a column. Whatever has the most units in a line, row or column, is what she will use. And yeah, her ability still stuns, but should be less annoying to deal with, given that her mana cost is higher. Her burst is gonna be pretty high too, but she's not gonna perma stun your backline, which I think is the more annoying version of Zyra. Now we have 4 costs. A lot of interesting ideas here, and I'm happy to talk about them. So we have Alistar, Galio, Malphite, Gnar, and Yorick, who are like the tanks. The main tanks being the first 3, and then the other 2 are like off tanks. So what's interesting here is that we have a set with a 4-cost Alistar, Galio, and Malphite, and Gnar, but you can't give all of them AoE CC abilities, even though all of those units have very iconic AoE CC abilities. So to make it work, I have to create other spells for the ones that aren't getting the AoE CC ability. So the winner is Galio, in that he's the AoE CC units. This is kind of a reprint of set 6 Galio, the 5 cost, except he's just a CC unit for the most parts. He has a interesting intentional mechanic where like he channels for like a little bit, but during that time he's invulnerable, so like that's like his form of damage reduction. So like what Riot has been trying to do is to try to give these CC units like something else other than the CC to make them like kind of tanky. So we had like Elise, like from set 13, she healed. Sejuani, she gets the bonus armor and magic resist. This Galio has like the 0.5 seconds of invulnerability, which is like something. And then otherwise he crashes down onto the largest clump, big AoE knock up with Alistar. This guy is pretty straightforward tank. He essentially uses his ult and his E and his passive from League. So he gets a lot of damage reduction. He tramples the enemies around him, and then at the end he heals. Malphite, similarly, does not knock up. Instead, he gets himself a shield. This skin is like, he's like a ship. Just is a ship. So he like, in this version, he rebuilds himself. He also has a pretty cool passive where every time he loses like a certain amount of his health, he does like an AoE like slam. Obviously this scales with like shields and healing, so like the more damage he mitigates, more like he'll slam the ground. It doesn't do a crazy amount of damage, but it's a pretty interesting way to play around him. Gnar is another CC unit. It's pretty hard to make spells for this guy that aren't him jumping and then turning into Mega Gnar and then doing something. So my favorite version of Gnar was the one where he did his Gnar thing and he jumped into the backline and he slammed the entire enemy team in a direction. So this Gnar does that. His first cast, he hops the backline and exactly does that. Slams everyone towards your team, does damage. What's different is that once he's in Mega Gnar form, his spell is like different. This becomes more of a bruiser carry, where Mega Gnar, his spell, he similarly jumps around, but he just like does damage. It's like basically his E from League, like the Mega Gnar, like it's just the stomp. He jumps around and does AoE damage. So in essence, he's like a bruiser, but he has that big AoE knock up. However, balance wise, he is meant to be like bruiser. Then we have Yorick, who has another interesting ability. This Yorick is like a summoner, where his spell summons up the maiden and is like a pretty like big unit herself. Now at this point, I'm not really sure how to balance Yorick like damage scaling. Personally, it could be either way, that it could be an AP or AD unit, but the point is you have both these Yorick and the maiden, and they both do damage and they heal. Yorick heals for some of the damage that maiden does, and it's generally meant to be like a bruiser unit who can overwhelm like other units, creating like more frontline. If maiden is already on the field, his spell just instead heals her. So yeah, she's gonna be very annoying to deal with. She's like the main carry of the two, but Yorick himself is a little bit protected by the maiden, as I said, she heals him for some of the damage that she does. Next we have Gangplank, who's gonna have one of the more iconic spells. His spell is kind of like his ult, except it's like very like localized and like targeted. When he casts, he fires a blast in front of him. Whenever he gets a takedown, so like a killer assist, he gets stacks of black powder. So every time he casts, he uses all the stacks and he fires more blasts. So this guy's like a snowbally bruiser. If he gets some kills, he can start blasting at like the whole board. Next we have Ezreal, who I think probably has the most creative spell I've created. I don't actually know if this is like a terrible idea, but I really like the idea, and I mean I can do what I want. So he's like an AD caster, except when he uses his spell, he permanently reduces his mana cost, and he eventually will get to 0 mana cost, and he'll cycle through different spells. So to start, he like will attack, and then his spell is just his Q from League, and then once his mana cost drops to 0, his spell replaces his attack, and he gets a new spell. So his main attack instead becomes his Q, and his spell is replaced with his ult from League. And then it's the same thing, where once his mana cost goes to 0, his attack is just permanently replaced with his ult. So over the course of combat, this Ezreal can scale up a lot, and then eventually can have a lot of AoE damage. I think this is a very scary design concept, but I just thought it was really cool. It's one of like the main things like carried the inspiration for the set. Ezreal was one of the first units I created. Next we have Draven, kind of interesting unit. If I were to remove any units from this set, the one most likely would be Draven, just because it's like a little it's a little annoying with like how he fits in with like all the traits, and his spell is like a little awkward. But it's an interesting enough idea, and I really like splash art. I can fit him, so I might as well like leave him in. His spell is pretty cool. He fits pretty well like with his traits. What he does, he basically uses his E. He like spins the axes, and they like kind of linger, and they travel through his targets, and then they eventually move past. It works pretty much identically to Yunara's W, if you're familiar with that. This Draven will target the furthest units. So obviously if like he has a clear line, he can't just straight up assassinate backline, because this spell does do a lot of damage, but if you have things in front of him, it'll linger. The thing is, he has like kind of guaranteed damage onto backline, unless you just have like a perfect wall of units like blocking. However, in most cases, like assuming like there's not something like assuming there's something in between him and his targets, you're getting like a little chip of damage at the end, and most of it will be stuck on the front line. However, this is another positioning game champion. Next we have Kassadin, who straightforwardly he uses his ult from League, his Rift Walk. This works pretty similarly to Set 14Z. Balance-wise, that was the main inspiration. He hops around to the furthest unit within a certain range. He does AoE damage, and then he does this Kassadin thing where every time he casts, he ramps up a little bit, so he gets a little bit of AP. Works the same as it did in, like, I think Set 9, his hero augments. It's pretty much the same as that. He has a pretty interesting traits. He like ramps up, a little hard to take down. Then we have Malzahar. The main inspiration was obviously Malzahar ult from League, but then also Set 9 Lux, who had the laser ability. This Malzahar is like basically a combination of the two. So this Malzahar fires a laser at his targets, but he stuns them for the duration. So he like channels, and the target that he's hitting is stunned. And if he kills a unit, like it just moves on to the next enemy, like the Lux did. So this guy's really good at shutting down like units that hop around a lot, the backline melee threats. For instance, like Kassadin, Gnar, Pyke. He's really good at shutting those down. Then we have Senna, pretty generic AD caster. Now Senna is my favorite champion in League, so I wanted to make sure that she had a spell that did her justice. And the main thing I went for was just a better implementation of what has already been tried, which is just her Q in League. Her spell is just straight up her Q in League, except I think it's best balanced as a 4 cost. And yeah, she fires a blast through her targets, does damage to all enemies hits, it heals all allies hits, and that's it. Obviously it's going to be more balanced around damage, but I think the spell just kind of makes the most sense as a 4 cost, because it does kind of a lot of things at once. She also perfectly shares traits with Lucian, so for the most part you're going to be playing the two of them together. Next we have Veigar. Pretty straightforward spell. He uses his W in League. He fires like blast at a target. He fires a blast at his targets, which has a delay, and then it like falls down from the sky, does AoE damage, Every time Vhagar kills a unit, he gets permanent AP. So as a forecast, like it might seem a little crazy, but like it's not a lot, and it'll ramp up slowly. But if you played around Vhagar from the start of the game, you can end up with like an extra 30 or 40 AP, which is pretty good. And then finally we have Xerath, another straightforward ability. He uses his Q, hits a lot of units, does a lot of damage, targets the most units in a line, similar to like Set's what 8, Star Guardian Talia, probably a lot of other units too. It's a pretty straightforward spell, but it's just a tried and true spell that I think is welcome in any set as your 4-cost AP carry. And this is another positioning game unit. One thing I want to emphasize is that this set, there is a lot of positioning nuance with your units. There's a lot of backline access, both from melee carries and just from the backline range carries. So overall, the skill ceiling of this set I expect to be pretty high. Finally, we have the 5 costs. It looks like there's 9 here, but one of them is just a different form, like 2 different forms of Blitzcrank. So like, let's talk about that first. Blitzcrank, he has 2 forms. I just made a card for both of them. I don't think you would like see both of them at the same time, but like basically you can switch between the 2 at will. Like when you place them on your board, you can just switch between the 2 forms. One is more of a tanky supportive unit, and the other one is like a more like carry unit. The one that you would pick is just based on what items you have. If you have like AP carry items, you would go for the carry one, and if you don't have like a lot of good items, you probably will just default to like the tank one. But basically his spell, it just hooks the farthest unit, and then depending on which form, it like can either give him a shield and like some other stuff, or it just makes him do a lot of damage. So for those of you who have been tormented by 2-cost Blitzcrank hook, you can, I don't know, relax or maybe panic a little bit, where for a lot of the game you probably won't have to deal with it, but I think late game, I think a lot of people are going to have a Blitzcrank on their board, so the end game will be pretty difficult. However, I do think this is a perfectly fair 5-cost spell. Next we have Evelyn. She is an AP assassin. Her spell's pretty convoluted, but basically she will charm nearby enemies and then lure them into her range, and then she will use her ult and sweep and teleports behind herself. Depending on like the positioning of like the enemy board, you can pull backline units towards her if there aren't better units, so there's a little bit of trickery there, but otherwise she's a straightforward AP assassin. Next we have Kled. This guy is pretty annoying because this guy has like Scarl. That's the main mechanic. He has Scarl, so if he gets taken down, he like dismounts, and then he has an opportunity to remount and then regain a lot of HP back. And then otherwise, he will just charge to the farthest units and wail on them and do damage, like bruisery, and overall pretty annoying and pretty menacing. Nocturne. So 5-cost Nocturne can only mean one thing. This guy has Nocturne ult. My implementation of Nocturne ult was pretty interesting. So he doesn't have the dash, but I think the main thing I wanted to emphasize on was like the paranoia. So to make that work, basically when he ults, so his ult will like apply paranoia to the entire enemy board, and what this is essentially it chills them. Basically, I wanted to capture the feeling of like, oh, like you can't see anything, but like it's a TFT, so like it doesn't really translate that well. That's why it's never been implemented, even though it's just like an iconic ability in League. So this was my best attempt at that. He has a unique trait, Nightmare, which I think contributes to that spell. I think that there's some interaction with how his spell works, and that. Apart from that, his like actual cast, what it does, it basically gives him like the AoE that he has like on his other forms. What 2-cost Nocturne from set 13, where he just has the AoE slashes and he like heals. Next we have Quinn and Valor. This is a pretty cool spell. It changed a lot from how it was when I first started. Basically, this is like truly like a tag team duo of units, where Valor will wipe across like the row with the column with the most units, and then she will, or he, Valor will just pick the unit that has done the most damage amongst all the units that they've hit, and Quinn will fire a Sky Strike, and it does AoE damage, and it does a lot. It's kind of a callback to set 6 Quinn, who had the high highest damage targeting, or I think it had like the highest attack speed targeting. And it also call back to Set's 9 Quinn, who had the column row targeting AoE ability. And it's another one that has a positioning game where now there's two opportunities to target the enemy carry, and then if either of them are successful, you have a lot of damage onto your backline carry. I wouldn't expect her to like one shot, but definitely a lot of threats. Especially since this thing is like kind of AoE blast, so you kind of want to position your main carry away from your other units when playing around Quinn or playing against Quinn. Next we have Rammus, who is one of the units of all time. This abomination was honestly has very little to fit in with the sets, but I have always like imagined this spell on a 5-cost Rammus, and yeah, this thing is just disgusting. So basically what it is a combination of sets 7.5 Terra and the combination of set 6 Victor. Basically, when he casts, he will get tanky, he'll get a bunch of resists, and then he'll call a bunch of saws to hit the enemies. These saws work like the lasers from set 6 Victor, where they'll just sweep across, not like row or column, it'll just like kind of like, I don't want to say randomly, but like it'll try to hit a bunch of units. And yeah, so basically it's a Victor from set 6, except it's a frontline tank version of that. And yeah, the goal here was for him to be like a Gargoyles Bloodthirster user, where he's a carry that scales with resistances and is just generally really annoying and disgusting and is everything that Rammus would be. It's just the bane of Mortlog. Renata as a champion is just really like annoying in that she has a lot of really cool things she can use as spells, but to implement them into TFT is like really dangerous and like difficult just because of like how like mechanics work. So this Renata does have her ult from League, and I did my best to try to implement that in like the safest way possible. So this Renata has a really high mana cost, but she fires a wave that's very wide and like hits pretty much the whole board. She does magic damage, and like she does a good amount of damage. Enemies hit by the blast will be berserk, which will make them target the nearest units, whether it's an ally or an enemy, for 2 seconds. During this time, they can't cast their ability, but auto attacks are fair game. So kind of similar to League, in that this is more of an anti-AD carry than it is for anything else. Lastly, we have Vayne, who is another one that's kind of like hard to make a spell for as a 5-cost. I mean, I just really wanted to use the skin for a Vayne, and I think the most appropriate would get a 5-cost, so I had to figure out something. This Vayne summons a bunch of bolts from like, I don't know, like I wouldn't say like portals or something. Like they come out from like the sky, and then they also converge onto her targets, and these bolts deal like bonus true damage. Basically, this Vayne is going to be montaging all over the place. I think balance-wise might have this issue where she's like almost guaranteed to be like the last unit alive if she's on your board. But I wouldn't say that's like terrible. Probably gives you more incentive to play around the units. Now let's talk about the traits of this set. And I'm gonna use this format with my documents as opposed to like slides with like the graphics, because it's a lot easier for me to change the document than it is to go and change like already made graphics. Whereas with like the units, like their cards, that's not gonna really change very much. So I felt comfortable making those. But anyway, starting with Abyssal. Abyssal are like the Cretans of the sea. I mean, this is like a pirate themed set, so you have like all the sea creatures as units you can play. At the start of combat and every 2 seconds, Abyssal gain max health and damage amp, occurring up to a certain number of times. The general design space for this trait was around like Elderwood from like set 4, which works kind of similarly with like the ramping up. The stats are different, but like the core concept is the same. One main difference though is that instead of being like a static amount, instead of like being 2 seconds 5 times, the amount of like ticks that you get from the trait scales with how much in the trade you are. So at 2 Abyssal, you get at the start of combat, and then at 2, 4, and 6 seconds, so for a total of 4 times. So the total stats you gain are 4 times these amounts, and then so on and so forth. So you can do the math for the rest of them. This is to make the trait feel a little bit more dynamic, just like, I don't know. The whole idea was that these traits, like these units are getting like bigger and more menacing over time. I don't know, because the sea is scary. The units are Fizz, Aatrox, Nami, Slumpkinch, and Gassadin. Mostly frontliners, Nami's a backliner. Next we have Harbinger, which is one of the more complex traits. It's pretty cool, honestly. It has a really cool theme where like this is like I said, a pirate themed world, and these guys are kind of meant to symbolize like the darkness within, the threats of like an impending doom, death. This is what hunts all the pirates. So gain a Harbinger talisman, which can be used to enact the vow of one of your Harbinger units. Harbingers gain health. So the way this works is that with this talisman, you can activate these vows, and these vows are like mini traits, and you can activate multiple of these mini traits depending on how far into the trait you go. This is kind of similar to like experiments. So Karthus has Vow of the Phantom. At the start of combat, set a random enemy's health to 30%. Basically, this is a phantom trait from set 1. Nice cheeky way to include this into the set. Not because I liked it, but because it's funny. Next we have Singed, who has Vow of the Chemist. Harbingers gain access to Singed AoE damage effect. So Singed has a passive AoE damage. It's like, you know, it's like poison, because he's like Singed. That's like what he does in League of Legends. So with this Vow active, all your Harbingers get access to that AoE damage over time effect. Kale has Vow of the Righteous. Your strongest Harbinger randomly upgrades one of its items to Radiant. This is modeled after Damasha from set 9. Can be tuned a little bit, like to make it a bit stronger or weaker. Pike was Vow of the Abyss. Harbingers gain max health and damage amp every 2 seconds. That might sound familiar because I just described a trait that just did that. And that's a reference to the idea that Pike was originally intended to be an abyssal unit, but I had to move him for the sake of like trait web space issues. It's problematic for Pike to have been an abyssal, so I moved him here where he like fits okay. Yorick has Vow of the Shepherd. Summon a ghoul to aid your team in combats every 6 seconds. These ghouls are kind of like the Zerat bugs from like the support item. They're just like tanky. They don't really do, they don't have like a spell or anything, but they just like punch and they do damage. So this just adds more units, more frontline to your board. Then we have Nocturne, Vow of the Nightmare. Nocturne's paranoia lasts for the entire combat. So, I mean, for one, to activate this, you need to have Nocturne on your board, but the way Nocturne's paranoia works is that it triggers on his ult and it's for 6 seconds, but with this, it's just for the entire combat. It's like at the combat start and the whole thing. And like not listed here, but listed on Nocturne's like ability. Nocturne's spell is upgraded with this vow, so that's his like nightmare. His paranoia passive doesn't become like useless on him with the vow. Like so he has like additional effects. He like gets CC immunity and a little bit of damage during the duration of his ult. And then lastly, the Emblem, which also has its own vow, Vow of the Dead. Enemies that fall below 10, and then a little bit of scaling here, percent of their max health are executed when damaged by Harbingers. It's kind of a generic one that's, I think, fits the theme, so pretty good. And then looking at the traits, we see some health, and then 1 talisman, 2, 3. I don't know if like 3 is like the best idea, but I mean, for now, I'll like leave it here. In a world would I'd have to like actually take a look and like balance it, I would be willing to remove it. Because like referencing something like experiments where they didn't have like the 3rd bonus makes me like a little iffy, especially because all of these are pretty strong, but also I can tune these numbers to be like weaker. So yeah, there's a lot of things here. And then you might notice that there's only 6 units here, and those units like are listed here. We have Karthus, Singed, Kale, Pike, Yorick, and Nocturne. But I also have a 9-piece, and that's kind of a product of how this set is designed, where there is a good amount of access to things like spatulas, to pans, to +1s to traits. So while it's still going to be pretty rare to get to like +3, I do want to at least have the idea of opening these traits. Like you can always play around a heavy vertical in almost any line. However, you have to work pretty hard to get there. Next I have the Elegance, which is kind of like these stylish pirates, led by Misfortune and Ezreal. Yeah, like they just have like, they're just like well dressed and whatever. This trait is modeled after set 8 Anima Squad and set 6 Academy, where you have the ramping health aspect of Anima Squad and you have the ramping other stats on cast like Academy. It's basically a combination of those two. So Elegance gain AD and AP, increasing this bonus whenever an Elegance casts. Elegance also gains style each time one casts. They gain 3 max health per point of style. So this health, like this style and health, this is permanent. and then this is during combat. So yeah, you have stats here, can ramp up okay, and then you have your chase trait. Your units are Akshan, Master Yi, Jace, Misfortune, Zyra, Ezreal, Galio, and Vayne. One thing to note is that early on, like, these units are intentionally designed not to stack this super well, but later into the traits or with Emblem, you can have access to, like, I would say, like, a battery, someone that can cast often to stack this. These numbers aren't that high for the same reason that, I mean, obviously, there's reason to believe that there can be exploits, but Akshan, Master Yi, Jace, Misfortune, Zyra, these units don't cast super often. You have to get to Ezreal, he's just like a spam caster, and then Vayne also is pretty good at casting a lot. But if you have an emblem, you can find another unit that will stack this really fast. Next we have Dreadway, which is like the more traditional pirate crew. This is led by Gangplank. This is like Gangplank's crew. Dreadway is the name of Gangplank's ship. I didn't want to like name this like the Jagged Hooks, which is like the name of Gangplank's crew, because that seems kind of like too lore accurate. But like I'm perfectly fine using the ship. It's kind of a cool name anyway. So yeah. Dreadway gain durability and Omnivamp. The Omnivamp is increased by 33% each time a Dreadway scores a kill. After 10 kills from Dreadway, gain loot. Basically, these units are pretty tough to take down, and they're like really stubborn. That's kind of the theme. And then you have this extra gold to kind of add a little bit of snowball, a little bit more like actual like offensive power to like actually be able to end fights up a little bit easier, because both of these stats don't really end fights faster, so it kind of gets kind of stally. So you gotta add something else here. Your units are Garen, Ryze, Diana, Rumble, Tristana, Gangplank, Malphite, and Quinn. Next we have Ardent Flame. This theme is like another pirate crew. The skin line used is La Illusion, which is like a fiery Day of the Dead themed skin line within League of Legends. So I just really like that skin line, so I wanted to make it work here. Select units burn the enemies they damage with their attacks and abilities for 5 seconds. Ardent Flame gain damage jump. Basically, you have free access to burn, and then you have a little bit of damage jump. But the interesting mechanic is just that all of these units have pretty good synergy with like applying stuff like burn. And then it's tuned in a way where like it's one of those traits where like not everyone gets the bonus initially, like it's kind of controlled, and then as you progress, you get more access to it. 2, only 1 unit gets this burn. All units get the damage jump, but only 1 unit gets the free burn. At 4, all Ardent Flames. At 6, all allies, and the burn is stronger. And another chase trait. Your units are Kiana, Nidalee, Ziggs, Draven, Gnar, and Renata. One thing to note about this origin is that there isn't that much frontline, but there's a lot of like complementary units you can add to this. Your frontliners are Kiana and Gnar, but neither of them are like super like pure tanky. So yeah, but they have access to traits that you can bring in actual good tanks, so it's perfectly fine. Next we have Armada. This is kind of meant to symbolize like a government force, sort of. They're not really any more good than any of the pirate crews. In fact, these are probably like morally worse than most of the crews. They're like just as villainous. The Armada gain a shield that lasts for 10 seconds. Gain a countdown that starts at 10 seconds. When the timer reaches 0, your team gains reinforcements, and Armada units gain attack speed for the rest of combat. So you get the shield, and this shield is meant to last the duration of the countdown. So once it's over, you get the effect. Your shield wears off, but you get your bonus reinforcements. These reinforcements are just a unit, so this is like a summon trait. And yes, so summon XYZ. This I haven't like designed the summon units, but basically, it would just get stronger as you like go more into the trait. So you summon something, and then at 5, it's like a better thing, and then at 7, which is +2, it's a summon like a really good thing. Your units are Warwick, Kalista, Jinzhao, Alistar, and Flood. Next we have Crystalline, which is a cash out trait. I'm not super like fond of cash out traits, just because I'm like really bad at playing them. They are pretty necessary in a set, I think, for most people, so like I'm pretty obligated to include one. As for the design, like I have some deals, but because I'm not someone who likes playing this, I'm not the best person to make one of these. Like if it were based on my personal taste, I would just do something like reprint Heartsteel. I think Heartsteel is a pretty good cash out trait on the basis of the player having much more autonomy than with other ones. However, tying into the theme of the sets and like the mechanics, I would probably do something more similar to like maybe Cypher and tie it into like the voyage system, which you can do where you cash out when you sail to an island or something. The units are Leona, Celia, Ashe, Nautilus, Xerath. But yeah, this is a cash out trait of some kind, and I think people would understand what that is. Loot streak, get a lot of loots, and you win out from there. Next we have Wild, which is the reroll trait. This is like the island's native inhabitants. They get stronger, they hunt, they're pretty cool. Wild gain bonus health and attack speed. Every round, gain stacks of hunt for every star level of wild units fielded in the previous round. Every 10 hunts, increase the stats by 3%. This is kind of similar to like Punk, but it's also kind of similar to like Conqueror. So I would say it's a combination of those two traits. And yeah, stats more, and then that's 7, which is +2. You're gonna get the family treatment, like the set 13 family, where you start getting loot. Or I guess kind of like Conquer too, where you start getting loot. And I mean, you get more stats, but not a lot more stats. And this works retroactively. So the moment you get this in, all the breakpoints that you missed, you'll get that. So it's a pretty good immediate spike. Next we have Desperado, which is like the item trait of this set. The Desperado is like a western, like country themed pirate crew. They're using the High Noon skin line. It's like a cowboy pirates crew. Desperado steal random items from units killed in the previous round. Stolen items decay after 3 rounds or after 1 round on the bench. Desperado gain 80 NAP. For every item stolen by Desperado, they gain 1 more AD or AP, well, AD/AP, up to the base value of each tier. This is kind of word salad, but basically, you have this flat amount, and you can get more stats up to this amount, which is double the base number. So, like, you can get up to double, which is this, and then double this, which is that, and so on. As for the items, so when your Desperado units defeat a unit, like let's say you defeat a unit holding a Warmogs, the next round you will have, if you have like space, you will get a Warmogs. If you put it on a unit, it'll last for 3 rounds. If you don't, it'll last for 1 round. If you leave it on your bench, it lasts for 1 round. Obviously, this can give you a lot of like combat strength, but if you let it decay, you can steal another item faster. So like let's say you get an item you don't like. Let's say you get like a Bloodthirster and you can't really use it early on. You can let it decay, and the next round you can steal a different item. And yeah, one reason you'd want to do this is to stack up this AD AP faster if you want to ramp up a little bit, or if you want to play for your strongest board and be like as powerful as possible and try to win streak. You just put the item on your units. The amount of total items you can have scales with your rank. So at 2 Desperado, you can only steal 1 item. You can only have 1 extra item. At 6, you can have 3, and then, yeah. Your units are Scion, Victor, Lucian, Rel, Senna, and Evelyn. Next, we have Dragon Tamer. This is a summon trait as well, but this is like a little different. Dragon Tamers summon a Zapmaul, who shares 20% of their AP. Every round, allies feel 1 snacks per star level to Zapmaul, granting him 20 health per snacks. Zapmaul's star level increases every 25 snacks. This is directly modeled after Trainer from set 7, except instead of being reroll oriented, this is like tempo oriented. So basically, you're not trying to like reroll anything, you're just trying to push levels. The more units you have on your board, the more snacks you'll have to feed your Zapmaul. So you're going to scale better by pushing levels. Yeah, additionally, these 2 units are both backliners. The Zapmaul is a backliner, so you want to pair this with like a frontline, like one that has a lot of frontline. Next we have Fatemaker. This is one of the more set mechanic, or this is like a set mechanic heavy traits. It's kind of complicated. At the start of every round, Fatemakers change fate and bring about an additional random positive events for your team or a negative event for your upcoming opponents. If an event is occurring naturally, it cannot be selected while it persists. Basically, this interacts with the weather system in this set, which I'll talk about. You can bring about a random positive effect for your team or negative effects for your enemy, and these effects are like traits. It's like a mini trait that it just changes every round, and like your units are Tariq, Nasus, and Malzahar. Also, like one thing to note is that, like I said, these events can occur naturally. So if you have one that already is active, you can't roll that one. And I mean, the events aren't going to happen forever. So once the natural ones wear off, you can go back to having the chance to roll it. Now we have the unique traits for some units, starting with Unholy, which is Remus, his unique trait. Remus being a unit that doesn't really fit the theme of the set, but this guy kind of deserves it. The Unholy gains a shield and taunts all enemies within 2 hexes at the start of combat. Construct, this is Blitzcrank's unique trait. This trait just details how he switches forms. He has a Paragon form and a Rogue form, which is like a support tank oriented form, and then this is the carry form. And yeah, it's just the form change, similar to like I think Arsenal in set 8 with like Aphelios. Like it just lets him change forms. Lastly, we have Agnes Embrace. This is Evelyn's unique trait. Evelyn already has 2 normal traits, so this is like a 3rd trait that's like unique. I felt okay making this its own trait because it's kind of like a passive that technically could be attached to any other unit, but it's not, and Evelyn's a 5 cost, so like I might as well make it a trait. What this is basically Evelyn's passive from League, where like when she's out of combat, she regens, and like she like in League she becomes invisible and stuff, whatever. This Evelyn in this set, she has access to aggro drops, meaning she has pretty good access to proc this. After she casts her spell, like she kind of aggro drops, so she'll regen a bit until she's targeted by an enemy. Also makes it so that you might not need to build any healing on her. Lastly, we have Stowaway, which ties into a set mechanic I'll talk about. But basically, this is a trait that categorizes certain units that can only be obtained from island events. At the start of every stage, stowaways go up in value, in star value. Each stowaway has a quest attached to them, and they can gain greater power upon its completion. These units cannot be normally obtained. They can only be obtained through events. So the way that you make them stronger is just like with this trait, the natural stage progression. They get some stats, and then when you complete their quest, they get like a special effect. Now we have the classes, starting with Musketeer. Musketeers gain AD. Additionally, Musketeer's first attack every 8 seconds is empowered to deal 100% AD bonus physical damage and apply additional effects based on which Musketeers are fielded. You have your AD, and additionally you have all the effects. So this is kind of similar to like Divinicore, like Guild or whatever, like where like if you have these units on your board, you have access to the effects. It's similar to like Harbinger, except all you need to do is have the unit on your board to get access to its effect. So Lucian has Sunder, 30% for 5 seconds. Misfortune has Burn, Wound. Ash has Chill and reduce move speed. Sen has Cleave around the target for 50% damage. Tristana has Mark target to increase crit damage taken by 15% for 5 seconds. And then the Emblem has Ricochet to the nearest enemy for 50% damage. And then if you have multiple emblems, you get multiple ricochets that do 50% damage of the previous. So the rest one's 50% and then 25, 12.5, like extra damage, so on. And your units are Lucian, Misfortune, Ash, Tristana, Senna. And yeah, this is the main AD backline traits. Very flexible. You don't have to have any specific amounts. You have some natural synergy. You have like Lucian, Senna. They share traits. And then any of these bonus you can just splash in. Next we have Swashbuckler, which is like the crit assassin trait. Swashbuckler's abilities can critically strike. They gain bonus crit chance and damage. Additionally, they will riposte the first instance of damage from each unique enemy, retaliating with a global attack. So basically, they have the normal like crits, like spell crits, crit damage, but they also have this like unique like defensive effect where the first instance of damage they take from each enemy, they ignore and instead they attack. They basically will guarantee the first strike on any given enemy, and this attack is just an auto. It has global range. It works like set 9 Deadeye, where like yeah, it's global. It resets their auto. It'll give them mana. But it's just an auto attack, so like all of the time this isn't gonna do like a lot of damage, but it's like to symbolize them getting the first strike. And then additionally with the breakdown, this effect is really powerful. So I didn't want to give too much power to the 2 traits. So this is like it looks like really weak, but you also have the spell crits and the crit. And then with this riposte effect, this 2-piece is actually probably really strong. But I mean whatever. And then the 4 and the 6, you have more stats. Like at the highest level of like activation, this trait can be really strong, but as opposed to like the more modern assassin like traits, this takes 6 units, so it takes a bit more investment to get there. And we don't have like the 2, 3, 4, 5. We just have the 2, 4, 6, and that's just to demand a little bit more commitment to playing around this trait. Next we have Buccaneer, which is like the AD Bruiser trait. Buccaneers gain durability and AD. While they're below 60% max health, the durability is doubled. While their current target is below 60% max health, the AD is doubled. Pretty straightforward design so that you can put an emblem onto a backliner and like you can still get a good amount of AD from it with like how the second part works. But yeah, it's really straightforward. The units are Garen, Kiana, Jace, Vi, Gangplank, and Clyde. All like AD bruisery units. Next we have Privateers. This is like a supportive trait. I kind of threw in all the units that didn't have good places elsewhere and put them in this trait, and I'm actually pretty satisfied with like the spread of units that got this trait. That actually feels pretty okay. The only thing is like I have this 4-4-5, but given the nature of this trait, it does make more sense to skew it towards like late game rather than early game. Early game it would be too strong, and then late game it's kind of the same thing that you'd want all the like it fits like the late game fantasy anyway, so like you're gonna do this anyway, might as well make it like obvious. Privateers heal the lowest health ally for 15% of the damage they deal. Your team gains armor and magic resist, which is doubled for Privateers. This is directly modeled off of Altruist. I mean, initially it wasn't, but like I noticed that by chance it happened to be like pretty much the same thing, so then I added this effect to make it a little bit more selfish. And additionally, we have this other selfish effect. The first time an ally dies, Privateers gain attack speed. Just to give you incentive to actually play around like the units themselves. But yeah, this is just a really strong, well-rounded, like semi-support trait. And yeah, we have a mix of front line and back line here. The units are Akshan, Diana, Nasus, Ezreal, Yorick, and Quinn. All these are like semi-carries. Some of them are just like normal backline carries, but some of these are like front line off-tank units. Next we have Witch Doctor, which is the primary AP trait of the sets. So the first part's pretty straightforward. Your team gets AP, Witch Doctors gain more. Simple enough. Every 6 seconds, a random Witch Doctor will cast a random spell. Each tier will enable one cast. It's essentially how set 14 Animal Squad works. Like, where you have, like, the different weapons from Animal Squad, and, like, when you get to the breakpoint, you can unlock a spell. It works kind of similarly, except it's random. So, basically, at 3 Witch Doctor, every 6 seconds, you'll randomly cast one of these... Like, one of your units will randomly cast one of these spells. And then at 5 Witch Doctor, you'll randomly cast one of these spells, and also one of these spells. Not necessarily the same units, but like a random unit will cast one of them. The same unit can cast both of them. At 7 Witch Doctor, a random unit will cast one of these, and one of these. And basically, it can ramp up to pretty crazy. But these numbers aren't going to be like super high, but it's pretty unique. I did want to, like, this is the kind of thing that would fit an Origin more than it would a class. But I feel like this mechanic doesn't really fit the theme of any Origin. Given that I wanted to make like this kind of like complexity, I'd have to commit this to an Origin with like really high like amount of units, but it's really hard to find the thing that fits, especially given that the whole thing would have to be like all units would have to be AP. So to make a really large vertical with like all AP units is like kind of strange. As for what these spells are, they kind of grow in complexity the further you go along the tiers. So the tier 1 spells are very simple. Cast on current targets and deal some bonus current, like percent current HP to them. It's like Giant Slayer. It's like a little bit more effective against tanks. Call the Weak. Cast on weakest enemy, dealing magic damage. Straightforward enough. Arcane Blast. Target largest clump in range, dealing magic damage. This is just an AoE. And tier 2, a little bit more complex. Grant 3% less HP, a decaying shield for 6 seconds. Not going to be a large shield, but it's like some kind of supportive value. Exposed Weakness, which is a piercing bolt that also does damage and shreds. So this is some utility. And then Eruption, which is another AoE ability, except this is a damage over time. No burn though, but I mean, if you have burn on the unit, I mean, this would apply it. So tier 3, the most complex. This is cast on current targets, deal damage, and mana reaves them. And it bounces. So this is like a chain lightning effect, like a static shiv proc that also mana reaves. Funnily enough, this is the Zatma spell from the Dragon Tamer trait. So like that's just what this is. So yeah, that's why it's called this. Bless self and Tuner's allies with 20% attack speed and grant 2% max health regen. Like this isn't like a lot of value, but it's like some supportive ability and it's pretty strong. It's a 1 in 3 chance, so it's like not that crazy. You do have a chance to buff up your team a bit. The last one, plague the target, dealing magic damage every second for the rest of combat. When the target dies, this effect moves to the nearest enemy. This is essentially set 13 Malzahar with like the permanent damage over time effect, and it spreads like the plague. This isn't gonna do like a lot of damage, but it can add up, and it's consistent, so it's a pretty good source of damage. And your units are Victor, Singed, Nidalee, Rumble, Lulu, Nazari, Renata. Singed and Rumble are frontliners, which is kind of necessary for these like large vertical classes, especially the main AP line. Next we have Brute, which is my replacement for Bruiser, which has been in most sets as the primary health trait for like tanks. Allies gain HP, Brutes gain double the amount. The first time a Brute is reduced to 50% health, it rapidly regens over 3 seconds and gains durability for the rest of combat. Basically, this looks like a lot of stuff, but like it's pretty straightforward. You get some starting health. When you drop to half health, you will heal for a percentage of your max health, and then you have some additional tankiness after that procs. Numerically, this is like, it looks like it's like more than like any trait would normally give, but it's like not really that simple, because this can be countered by anti-heal, this can be like countered by a lot of things. It's not all instant, so like against high burst, these units are still like vulnerable, but at its maximum capacity, this is like a pretty strong like scaling trait. And I think, despite the way people would think about how this synergizes with like stats, it does incentivize you to build health. Like this does incentivize you to build resists and everything. The durability isn't high enough where you wouldn't want any durability, so this has a lot of synergy with like all tank stats, like a tank trait would. The units are Scion, Warwick, Riven, Rumble, Tahm Kench, Alistar, and Gnar. Next we have Reinforced. This is the resistance trait of the set. Reinforced gain armor and magic resist. Every second they gain more. And then other ramping traits, because I love ramping. Yeah, starting them out, and then every second you get more. So compared to other resistance traits, this is weaker at the start of combat and stronger at the end of combat, which, I mean, isn't necessarily like the best idea, but I mean, I just like this. Your units are Leona, Garen, Tarek, Xin Rel, Malphite, and Remus. Lastly, we have Steadfast. Most sets have like a health trait, a resistance trait, and a miscellaneous tank trait, usually in the form of durability or shields. This trait is durability. Steadfast gain durability, doubled for 4 seconds after casting durability. Really straightforward. You get durability, damage reduction. It's a multiplier. One thing to note is that I don't plan on having this is not a craftable emblem. This value is like really scary, and I mean probably like deserving of like nerf, but like because this isn't an actual set, I wouldn't have like the data to like prove that this is like too problematic. But like the idea of 60% damage reduction is like really scary. That said, I'm also like considering like not having an emblem for this at all and just leaving it to these like units, because at least like these won't abuse it, but like there is some tomfoolery that can be done. Your units are Aatrox, Master Yi, Singed, Nautilus, Galio, and Blitzcrank. Next we have Headhunter, which is another backliner trait. Headhunters gain attack speed. Each time a Headhunter kills an enemy, all Headhunters gain more. This is like base value snowball, which is something that I like to do. This is attack speed. You have a 2, 4, 6 piece. Pretty straightforward. This resets after every round, but like, yeah. Your units are Sivir, Akshan, Clusta, Kale, Draven, and Vayne. Most of these are 80 units, because I kind of needed to give them a trait, but I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't put this on literally any other type of units. Any AP or any melee carries. That would work perfectly fine. Next we have Invoker. The funny thing about Invoker is that it's kind of like been like historically flip-flopped with like Scholar, so like what this trait quite literally is a reprint of set 6 Scholar, but if you look at the history and how Riot names their traits, we've seen some flip-flopping, so yeah, I'm calling this Invoker now. So the design of this trait, it kind of counters the modernization of TFT in the sense that Riot has been leaning more towards you make like any kind of supportive trait will have its value, but then you lower it and then you like make it increase for the units themselves. That way you're not incentivized to just play every support trait and have a tons of free value. So like basically compared to like set 14 Dynamo, it's quite literally the same trait, except it's like what, every 3 seconds, and then the numbers are like balanced in a way where it's like this, it's less, but it's doubled for the Dynamo units. This trait is not like that, and I mean the reason for that isn't like a necessarily a balance thing. I think probably Riot is correct in their implementation. However, I just want to call back to a better time. Set 6, as I said, this is referenced off of, where Scholar was the, I'd say, catalyst to one of the most flexible metas of all time. One of the main appeals of the Scholar trait in Set 6 was that all these units, like, one, their traits buffed the whole board, but also these units, for the most part, were supportive in nature. So the idea of all these support units and the support trait on your board made it so that every late game board was about playing support units and then having a flexible carry, which made it so that Set 6 had the most flexible carry meta in like all of TFT history. Like there's many AD flex variations, there's AP flex variations, and all of it revolves around a couple traits, and one of the strongest, like most relevant parts was Scholar. Additionally, there's also Socialite and Enchanter, two other support traits that like similarly they contributed to like the debug flex meta, and I'm a huge flex meta enjoyer. And if we look through the history of TFT, we have not had a flex meta in a long time because Riot has been straying away from these kinds of supportive traits and units. And I think one thing people are going to have to realize that you're probably never going to have that again with the current design philosophy. So even though I think balance-wise, the Riot is making like a correct decision, I think for the sake of fun and flexibility, which I mean, kind of ties into fun, the idea of this trait or something similar would need to exist. So this is more of an experiment, and it's more of a statement than it is like an actual trait design. As I said, it's quite literally a reprint. Your units are Ryze, Nami, Nessus, Zyra, and Xerath. Penultimately, we have Devastator. This is one of the more creative traits, I think. At least thematically, I'll kind of try to describe it well. Devastator's abilities impact the arena, echoing their abilities after 1.5 seconds as true damage. The idea behind this is that like all of these units have their AoE effects, like all these they have AoE spells, and then after they cast their spell, you get like a secondary explosion that like comes from the arena, and it's like it like would capitalize on like the hex system, and it would just be like these like basically the hexes would explode, and it like with like a white explosion, and like I don't know how to describe it, but like basically there would not be any emblem for this. It's only these units, and this was originally going to be just 4, but like I mean, I just added another unit here because why not? But yeah, and then the tuning wise, I mean, these numbers might be low, but it's true damage, so it's probably not low. It's probably fine. So Karthus, Talia, Ziggs, GP, Vagar. Like I said, all their spells are area effect, so they hit multiple tiles, and then those tiles would explode, like after delay, which I think would be really cool if implemented correctly. Finally, we have Nightmare, which is Nocturne's unique trait. The reason this trait exists is because with the way I designed the trait web, Nocturne was really hard to give any trait, or like any class, so I had to give him his own unique class. As like a 5 cost, it's fine. When Nocturne casts their ability, the arena darkens for 6 seconds and all enemies are 20% chilled and deal 10% less damage over the duration. If Valve the Nightmare is activated, Nocturne is instead immune to CC for this duration and deals 5% increased damage for each debuff the target has. This is like Paranoia, which is Nocturne's ult in League of Legends. So Nocturne is like a really, really like notorious unit or champion in League. His ult is incredibly iconic, but the implementation in TFT would be really annoying. The main thing is that when Nocturne casts his ult, the enemy team can't see. It blocks their vision and it like nearsights them, so like they have like almost nothing like they can see. However, in TFT, since the units fight themselves, that doesn't really matter. So I need to find a way to recreate the idea of not being able to see. So I kind of settled with chill and deal less damage. Yeah, I mean, you can also make the screen like visibly darken. That'd be cool. Valve the Nightmare, which I talked about earlier, it makes us that this is active permanently. As a result, if that's active permanently, this is basically not a trait, so instead we have this effect while this is active. He's immune to CC for the 6 seconds, and he deals increased damage for each debuff. There's a lot of access to debuffs. So, like, there's Sunder Shred, Burn, Chill, Mana Reave. There's the Mark from, like, Musketeer. There's probably some other ones I forgot, but like you can get to like 25, 30, 35 maybe 40 if you like play around it. Even passively, if you get like 15, 10, like that's fine. But yeah, that's all the classes and origins of Shimmering Seas. Now let's talk about the main mechanics for this set. I'm going to split this into a couple of different sections because it's kind of like a bunch of set mechanics kind of put together, but each has like their own thing and they all kind of work to fit the theme that's going on. So the primary set mechanic, I would say, is voyages. Basically, at the start of every stage, players get to choose which island they want to sail to, and at the end of the stage, they will reach their destination. These islands will replace the traditional PvE rounds. It basically works the same way, but now you have like a bit of like tailored loot. Each of the different islands have different loot tables. So while the standard like drops are going to be the same regardless of what you visit, you have more control over the actual things that you get. So for instance, if on a PvE round you get dropped 2 blue orbs and 2 gray orbs, all players will be dropped the same thing. However, what's in those orbs will be catered to like based on what island you're on. And there's a bit of normalization. So like 50% of the loot is just going to be like the same and 50% is going to be tailored. That way it's not super swingy and like RNG. Additionally, by exploring different islands, you have the opportunity to unlock quests, unlock new islands, you can discover things, you can activate things. So the main decision with voyages is to either prioritize getting a specific type of loots that you want to play for, or to work towards unlocking new islands, or to progress in quests, which can be used to unlock powerful items. So the map for all players is the same. So when one player discovers something, all people can see what they can, like what they've discovered. However, they have to meet the unlock criteria before they're able to do the same thing. So like let's say at the start of stage 2, 3 players choose to sail to Island X. At the end of stage 2, they will arrive and then they'll get their loot. And then let's say they unlock Island Y because they visited Island X. All players can see that you can unlock Island Y by visiting Island X, but they can't unlock Island Y until they have done so themselves. Some examples of islands, I don't have names, but like just like for the type of like variation that you can see, ones that will like drop more gold, ones that'll drop like specific units, so like maybe you'll get like a bunch of 1 cost or 2 costs or 3 costs, like instead of gold. One that has like a higher chance for components, so like in the place of like gold, maybe you'll get more components or something. Higher chance for a spat/pan. This would be like if you get like a gold orb or something, like it'll be different. So like maybe different like 2 islands will have like the same gray and blue orb drops, but like the gold orbs will be different or the prismatic orbs will be different. There's also part of the voyage system will be to recruit stowaways, which is another set mechanic I'll talk about later. But basically, these are units. These are units that you can only access through these voyages. So I will talk about that soon. So a little preview into like the quest system. You visit random islands and you like can either trigger quests, or you might have quests triggered at the start of the game. You can, like multiple can be active at the same time, and sometimes by chance they can have like the same kind of requirements. Maybe 2 different quests will want you to visit a certain island or to have some sort of requirements. So I mean, you can kind of get lucky there. All the quests that will exist in a game will be the same for all players. However, like I said, each player has to meet the criteria to activate and complete them. So like an example of a quest would be the Radiant Infinity Edge quests, which I mean, this could be any Radiant item or anything, and the actual like steps can be like changed or like mixed up. But like let's say this quest is activated at the start of the game in that particular game. The first thing it'll tell you to do will be like, let's say, visit Island X, then visit Island Y, and then do something else. In this case, have a unit hold Infinity Edge and deal a cumulative total of 50,000 damage between rounds. And when you complete it, that Infinity Edge becomes Radiant. So to complete this quest, you'd have to basically visit Island X, which you'd have to wait at the end of stage 2, visit Island Y, the end of stage 3, and then do this, which would probably happen in like the middle, depending on how strong you are, how good your item holder is. sometime, like the end of stage 4 probably, maybe early stage 5. As a result, you get a radiant item. In this case, it's not an extra item, it's just like kind of a radiant refractor. However, there could be other ones where you just get the item itself, though they might be a little bit harder to do. Another example would be for, like, let's say a support item, kind of the same thing. Let's say this quest is unlocked by having visited this like Island X for the first time, and then afterwards, like the next thing could be like, oh, build 3 completed items, and then once you've done that, it'll be like, oh, visit Island Y, and then you will get your treasure on Island Y, and once you do that, you'll get an unstable treasure chest, which is like a support item. Basically, these quests will have like different tasks, and then the amount and the complexity of the tasks would scale with what the reward is, and then if you complete them all, you get the reward. These are meant to incentivize people to either pick a particular order of islands because their quests require them to, or if, let's say, there's a, like, if you want to like fast 9, maybe you just want to always go to the gold island, so you're sacrificing this possible quest value in exchange for like playing towards your strategy. There's a lot to work with here. Obviously, this is something that we need really fine-tuning and a lot of care dedicated to it, more than I could describe in this kind of video. The next mechanic is events. And I want to clarify that this sounds kind of similar to like encounters or hacks, and while it works kind of similarly, I guess I could kind of like change this to like weather events. Basically, TFT now has weather. Throughout the game, there's a chance for various weather conditions to occur, influencing combat. Weather events will be forecasted 1 to 3 rounds of notice and will impact all boards on the rounds they take place for 1 to 3 rounds. After a weather event takes place, there will be at least 3 rounds of cooldown before another one can be forecasted. So basically, let's say on 2-1, it is forecasted that you will get Scorching Sun, and then on 2-3, the Scorching Sun arrives and it takes place just for that round. Basically, on that round, all units, which means like both you and your opponents, like this will affect all boards equally, they're burned and wounded. And there's different types of events. Obviously, this list could be worked on more, but some examples could be like Gale Winds, all units gain attack speed at the start of combat and after every 5 seconds. Rejuvenating Mist, every 3 seconds, all units regen 4% of their max health and 5% of their max mana, or like a -1. At 10 seconds into combat, all units are knocked up for 1.5 seconds and take 10% of their max health as true damage. A lot of these events are going to tie into the Fatemaker trait, who has the ability to summon these. They won't overlap with any naturally occurring events, which is what the mechanic is, but like you'll basically, the way that trait would work is it would take from this list and it would do it for either your team if it's good or the enemy team if it's bad. Yeah, there's a lot of different mechanics. It's basically the same thing as encounters / hacks, except this is only combat oriented. So, I mean, I don't know if people are going to feel better or worse about that specifically, because I can see certain weather events having a stronger influence on certain comps than others, but it's definitely something that can be played with and can be balanced to be at least pretty interesting to see. Now, I've been alluding to it a lot, but let's talk about what stowaways actually are. As I said, by visiting certain islands, you can trigger quests, and some of these islands can trigger stowaway events. With this, you'll be able to access stowaway units, which are special supportive units that grow stronger over the course of the game. The stowaways come with their special quests that upon completion grant access to their unique trait, which is going to be pretty powerful. Power-wise, I would say stowaways start the game as like a 2-star 1 cost, or like maybe a 2-star 2 cost. Late game, I'd say that they would end up being about as strong as a 2-star 4 cost, but a lot of their power budget is built in with support, so that's going to be doing a lot more heavy lifting than the unit itself might do. Now, I have a couple of stowaways to talk about. There can be more, but I've designed these 4. They have very interesting kits, and they can do a lot. Starting with Milio, he is primarily a healer. He does some damage. Like, it's pretty bad to have units not do any damage. Milio summons a Formigo on the ally with the lowest percent health for 6 seconds. All allies within 1 hex of the Formigo heal every second, and all enemies take magic damage every second. Basically, this little thing is going to follow around your unit, and he's going to heal everyone up, and he's going to damage any enemies nearby. His unique traits, once you complete his quest, will be Rain Dancer. Your team heals for 5% of their max health every 3 seconds. If they're full health, they'll restore 6 mana instead. This is supposed to be a callback to Preserver, and funnily enough, if the Rejuvenating Mist weather effect is active, gain both bonuses together in addition to the weather effects. Basically, his unique passive is basically Preserver, but then this event is also Preserver, so you get like basically like the max Preserver. Like, I think this was like what you would get if you had like max Preserver with Emblem, and I think with the augment. So this is like the strongest Preserver that you would have been able to get in set 12. That's basically what this is. And that's with both active together. It's like a special bonus. Fiora's probably gonna be one of the more problematic ones. So the unit itself is supposed to be kind of anti-tank, but then the trait that she gives is just kind of broken, and I'll explain later. Fiora rapidly attacks twice, first sundering and shredding the target for 8 seconds, and the second dealing a bonus percent max health 2 damage and healing herself. It's basically her E and League, just the 2 quick hits, first to weaken them and then to strike hard and then kind of sustain herself. Her trait, Captain, she learns from her allies and she gains the highest non-exclusive trait activated by your team. Basically, whatever the highest trait you have active that isn't like a unique trait, she will gain that trait and she'll contribute to it. Which is very, very strong for verticals and for chase traits. But you have to RNG the Fiora and you have to complete her quest. But considering that she late game, if you do everything, she becomes a pretty good unit to have on your board anyway, so it can make your board very strong, especially if you are closer to that trait. Next we have Bard, who's pretty goofy, kind of has a lot going on, but like it's gonna be a numbers game, I'll say. Bard sends magical energy towards the largest group of enemies, stunning them and dealing magic damage. This is essentially his ult from League. It doesn't. I mean, his ult doesn't do damage in League, but like, this is just gonna do. This is a CC ability. He's a backliner and it's just a big AOE CC ability. But it has a very high mana cost. Kind of more of a balance lever for early game. His unique trait is Caretaker. When Bard casts his spell, he also summons a portal that can bring random aids 3 times per cast. You get extra little effects every time you cast. He's not going to cast too often, so I made it so that you get more of these, and then I balance it around that, instead of I'd have to like drastically swing these. And that'd make it more RNG heavy. By doing it this way, it makes it so that it's less RNG heavy, because the numbers average themselves out. So you have a chance for a Doot, which is a callback to set 7 Bard, who couldn't do this. It would permanently raise your shot odds for 3 for 5 cost by 1%. You have a chance for a Chime, which heals the lowest percent health ally. You have a Meep, which does damage to the lowest percent health enemy, and just gold. You just get a gold from the portal. Remember, each time you cast, you get 3 of these. It's just gonna pick randomly based on these percentages, and yeah, you can get the same thing multiple times. You can get triple gold, you can get triple Chime, you can get triple Doot. The last one is probably the most complex, but probably the coolest. Aphelios. The design idea is that he starts off as the weakest, and then late game, he's probably the strongest. Aphelios fires a bolt of energy towards the furthest enemy, dealing magic damage to the first enemy hit and marking them. Aphelios rapidly attacks the marked target and gains a chakram for the rest of combat. Each chakram grants him 10% damage amp. Essentially, he's just a stacking unit. His spell targets the furthest enemy. He's kind of a caster, kind of a marksman. He ramps up over the course of the fights, but it's nothing too crazy. However, where he actually has a lot of stuff is in his unique trait, Hitman and the Seer. Aphelios reunites with his sister, Alun, allowing her to aid your team in combat. Alun is an extra summon unit. She's functionally like a golem, in the sense that she doesn't take up a unit spot, but she can't hold items. At the start of every round, Alun will create a random weapon that lasts 1 round, which can be wielded by an ally. You have these 5 weapons, and what they are. Power-wise, they're kind of like close to artifacts. You get a random artifact each round, and the idea is that you could put any of these onto Aphelios, but like maybe sometimes you can also put them on other units. However, for specific synergies, it's kind of RNG as to whether you'd have access to it that round, but all of them should at least be good with like an AD backliner. You have Calibrum, which is the green gun, basically a sniper's focused. Severum, the red gun, it's basically what's end, but physical damage. Gravitum, which is the purple gun, it's basically a frozen mallet, like from Pengu's Party, from Infernum, which is the blue gun. Basically a Runon's Hurricane, but with more bolts that do less damage. And like that's the idea to make it kind of more flamethrowery. And Crescendum, which is the white gun, and it's basically a buffed Kraken's Fury. And Alun herself, she does something. You can't put items onto her, and she's kind of utility, but she can do a little bit of damage. But like, because you can't put items onto her, she's not gonna do like a lot. But she's pretty cool. Alun summons 3 small comets to strike random enemies, and a large comet to strike the largest group of enemies. Enemies struck by comets take magic damage and are 30% mana relieved. So that's like her utility. Her spell will look very cool, so it'll definitely be rewarding to play. And yeah, it's basically it's kind of like a 2-in-1 unit wise. So combat wise, you're getting the most power compared to the 4 by far, but the other ones do have a lot of like good utility and a lot of scaling potential. Now, some other stuff that we can take a look at are hero augments. The whole design philosophy is just to take units and change the way that they're played. This is, for the most part, going to be to make tanks into some form of carry. The 1 to 3 cost, like something that you'd reroll. Find ways to like add stuff or to generally change things, and then yeah, so you'd have probably a different comp, different items, and the goal is to make they feel like a different champion. I have like a bunch of these. Not all of them would exist at the same time. You'd probably have like most of them. Like you'd probably just take like the best, like 6 to 8. So like for instance, one example would be to have Scion have like Sion's passive from League, which means that when he dies, he like revives and then like starts like losing health and he does a lot of damage while he's like dead. Uh, that could be an interesting implementation like for Scion. And I mean, a lot of these can get pretty complicated. Like Mad Chemist is just practically a reprint of like this augments in set 13 like of the past. I feel like that's a pretty good one to reprint. A lot of these add something or they rework something. So like Warwick, it like reworks his ability. Jace Jinzhao adds stuff to the spell to make it more carry oriented, and so on. Tarix is interesting because like I'm trying to mimic the pattern of League of Legends Taric, where he's like spam casting his Q. Like his Q is pretty low impact, but it's like a spammable spell and it synergizes with his kit. So kind of make something akin to that. Some technical stuff like Rumble, you can remove shield, which means he's not mana locked, so he's like a spam caster. And that kind of fits in with more of a carry. And then there's a lot of stuff to play with, a lot of interesting ideas that can be done. Next, let's talk about trait augments. While I could be creating a bunch of new augments to fit this set, it's kind of hard to like include that, and that would take a lot of time. However, something that is catered towards my sets would be the traits. So for the most part, these traits are going to have augments that correspond to them. That can be a good way to angle towards a certain comp. So I do have all these augments for all these traits. All of them can be pretty interesting. Some of them are probably higher quality design-wise than others, but there's still like a couple interesting ones. Like this Armada one. Armada, you get your reinforcements after a certain amount of time, but with this augment, you get whatever you would have gotten at 10 seconds, you will additionally get another one at the start of combat, which I think is pretty cool. Abyssal, while this seems pretty simple, this scales with how, like, your stack scales with how far into the trait you are, so the more Abyssal you have, the longer this durability lasts, which can be pretty cool. Musketeer gets resets on their Musketeer cooldown. Witch Doctors, kind of something similar. Their cooldown is lowered, and then they get an additional effect when they actually use a Witch Doctor spell. Devastators get like more explosions that do a bit of bonus damage after a further delay. Even Stowaways, they have an augment. This being tied to like a set mechanic is like a bit convoluted, so I'm not gonna like overthink this one. But yeah, just to show that this is a trait, and I think it deserves a similar amount of attention.